people are coming in, I'm just going to say a few words in the beginning to get us started, and then I will let Stephan take it away. So a couple of words about myself. I'm Akosh. I'm the CEO of Airtime. And Airtime is a user engagement platform for small and medium-sized tech companies to validate user needs rapidly, so you can improve your product adoption. Now, one of the books, I brought it for myself, that I came across in the last years, and I think it made a lot of impact, and I'm sure many of you have it on your bookshelves, is Continuous Discovery Habits by Teresa Torres. And she has this amazing framework about opportunity solution trees. And when I read the book, I thought it's awesome. And what would be more awesome is to see this in practice. Now, lucky enough for me, Stephan is someone I know, I'm acquainted with, and we even worked at one point together in the same company. And when I heard Stephan is a big fan of opportunity solution trees, and that's something that he implemented at Grover, I thought this is the right moment to hear about the behind-the-scenes stories, what works well, what doesn't, what are the pitfalls and things to look out for. So I did a lot of talking now for the introduction. I hope everyone's here. One admin stuff, there's in the lower right corner, there's a chat icon. If you have any questions, even during the webinar, feel free to post it there. When Stephan is through, we will go into a Q&A session, and I will throw these questions on the screen for Stephan, and we'll pick his mind jointly. So without further ado, Stephan, it's a pleasure and honor to have you here, and I hand over the virtual mic to you.
Awesome. So thanks, Akosh. Hi, everyone. It's definitely a pleasure to be here. I hope you can hear me all very clearly with the mic. Otherwise, just please let me know. No, it's a pleasure to be here. Just just 30 seconds briefly about myself. I've been quite involved in product discovery over the last couple of 7 years with really different type of organizations. So ranging from a venture builder, company builder, to a big tech company, and now a scale-up. And yeah, product discovery, I mean, this is a topic and opportunity solution trees where we would definitely need more than 30 minutes, but it's something I'm really excited about. And as Akosh said, there are definitely a lot of pitfalls, a lot of learnings along the way. And honestly, first of all, I think there is no silver bullet when we speak about product discovery or opportunity solution trees. And I think this is so important to understand. I just, for myself, had a lot of meaningful learnings and best practices by actually leveraging OSTs on a day-to-day basis, ranging from, you need to solve a couple of critical problems which are more essential and you need to expand your mindset about them, but also how you can embed it into an organizational structure for product teams. So in the next 30 minutes, I will give you a couple of examples on how we have been using them, what's working well for us, where I've seen a challenge. What is an opportunity solution tree? Also very briefly with an example, because I think we have a couple of people who who are not so familiar yet with this topic. And then we're ending up with a few examples on how you can also operationalize them, because there's a big jump between opportunity mapping and opportunity management. And we also recently started to actually roll out Jira Discovery across all product teams. So I will give a couple of learnings from that, and we will see how far we get with the time. So having this said, let me share my screen and jump right into the context. So, all right. Is this coming up, guys? Can you see it? Super. I assume so. Yeah. All right. So just first things first, why are we actually talking about product discovery in the context of opportunity solution trees, and why should we care? So I think there's something really important to understand. And if you just zoom out high level, and I think many of you are familiar with it, let's imagine you're building and launching a new product, right? You have a couple of cycles and stages you're going through. You start now with the why are we actually building this, right? What do we want to achieve? What are we building? To actually how are we delivering it? So there are a couple of phases, ranging from product vision, strategy to product discovery, making sure, you understand what you're building and making sure you're building the right thing to actually delivering it. And if you look into practice, right, by speaking to colleagues, looking into, different type of organizations, there's what actually comes more and more often, to my mind, and what I see is happening is basically that in practice, this stage is quite often neglected or completely skipped. And this is something, which we actually find a lot of very interesting data about it. What Intercom has done, for instance, they've taken a look into different startups and scale-ups, and they wanted to understand how 100 units of work are split across a development cycle. And what they figured out by looking into that is basically that a typical startup is spending a bit of time in prioritizing the problem, defining it, designing the solutions. And some startups actually spend zero time on it. So when we talk about discovery, there's basically, like maybe 20% of the capacity spent on it, and the majority goes straight into building a solution. And why does this matter? I mean, if you take a look at the number one reason why companies are failing, like startups or tech companies, we actually see it's related to not achieving a market need and not creating value for your customers or your business. And that's an interesting one. So if you go to CB Insights, really recommendable to read through the top 20 reasons why startups are failing. And I mean, why is this the case, right? The truth is, and I typically love to show this picture because I think it's just simply true. No one of us is a Palantir, right? So we simply can't predict if a product which we're going to build is going to work out in 8 or 12 months from now. So what is going to happen, if we launch in 8 or 10 months without validating it properly and rushing through discovery? We will face very high costs if we are wrong, right? And as a job as a product manager, I think it's quite simple. You need to maximize the value creation for both your customers and your business with the resources you have available based on all the opportunities you're getting exposed to. So you need to pick the right ones. And this is something extremely difficult. This is not easy. And the problem is, right, if you launch at a very late stage with your validation, things will get very expensive. The alternative to that is obviously, and I think many of you have done it in the past, I think we have a lot of people from product and design here in the call, which is great, that you obviously try to validate things as early as possible. And if you fail, that's also right, because then you at least learned very early on that you're on the wrong track and you can reprioritize the opportunities you are actually putting at the center of your strategy. So talking about OSTs and why this matters, first of all, just disclaimer, this is really important to understand. There is no silver bullet. And I actually love what Marty Kagan said with, people are always searching for a silver bullet, but there is no silver bullet. And inevitably they will figure that out. And an opportunity solution is neither a silver bullet. And this is important for everyone, I think, you really to embrace. Also at Grover, not every team of us is working with OSTs. We have a lot of product teams who are using them on a continuous basis and doing that at scale in a fantastic manner. But I also had a chat with a product manager last week who said, hey, actually it's great. I see the value of how teams are using it. But for me personally, actually I'm not so convinced and confident in using an OST. And I have an alternative setup on how I'm actually breaking my opportunities down, which is absolutely fine, right? It's not about the process, it's about the value creation. And this is one tool which worked really well for myself. And this is what we're going to cover in the next couple of minutes. Why I think it's important, if you take a look at some of the challenges, on product discovery, which we just discussed across different scale-ups or type of organizations, I get kind of the impression it boils down to 3 reasons. One is like, there's a lack of a proper structure and process and muscle, also for the teams, to drive product discovery at scale. And it always feels like, hey, product discovery isn't that easy. And truth is, no, doing this properly, efficiently, with a high quality is definitely complex. And you need time and experience, to learn it. It starts, with user research to experimentation, to opportunity mapping, stakeholder management. So there are a lot of competency you need to master. And if you don't have the structure to do this very effectively and efficiently, that your team is aligned to it, it will be a challenge. One of the biggest challenges at all, what I've seen is like the organizational mindset, right? So if an organizational mindset is not there, to talk about outcomes and make sure you have a North Star based on outcomes, you will have a hard time. And last but not least, achieving fundamental stakeholder alignment. So when I started in product, I was reading a lot about the skill set and, which I need to acquire. And I remember when I was thinking about, hey, stakeholder management comes always as top priority. And I was wondering, isn't that the easy part? Like, isn't stakeholder management a soft skill which you are easily able to acquire? But the truth is, if I've seen people failing, then the majority of the reasons it was related to stakeholder management. So what I see what opportunity solution trees are doing is you address those challenges actually in a very natural manner, because what we're doing is like we make a desired outcome or a North Star. So we're not talking about outputs, we're not talking about features, we're talking about the real impact which we want to achieve. And we have a visual representation of our opportunity space. And this visual representation is really, really important. And I will dig deeper into that in a few minutes. And you also have a structure in place, which is encouraging that you have continuous touch points with your user. It's encouraging that you're expanding your opportunity space. So we're not talking about one feature, one solution for the problem, or to reach our outcome, there might be multiple opportunities. And we also encourage continuous experimentation. So opportunity solution, we just 101 very briefly. What is it? How does it work? And what are the learnings on that? So, I mean, for those of you who have not seen it, who have not used it, an opportunity solution tree really comes in all type of visual representations and forms. And quite often people react to that and say, hey, this is actually quite messy. And I mean, I've seen Miro boards, where we have like hundreds of opportunities mapped. It's getting quite huge over time. So it definitely becomes messy. But the structure is actually not messy at all. The structure is actually very clean and very structured. You start with something, and I just quickly go through that before we jump into an example. You start with a desired outcome. So it's the most important part. This really becomes your North Star. So you define clearly what you ultimately aim to achieve and what success means. And here we don't say, oh, we need to ship a product. Here we say, oh, we want to increase user retention. We want to increase user engagement. So we define a clear value creation of what we want to achieve based on a real outcome. Then we have opportunities. So here we are leveraging our standing from our customers, like, hey, what are their needs? What are their pain points? What desires do they have? How could we potentially address this desired outcome? And the important point here is we already see that a lot of people are getting confused. There's a difference between an opportunity and a solution. And this is really, really important. And with the next example on the next slide, which you will see, I hope it will get more clear. But based on this opportunity, which is more broader on purpose, you can think about what are the solutions, like how might we, actually deliver upon that? What is the concrete solution which comes into our mind? How can we test this solution in a very simple and swift manner in order to generate data? And let's see if this data is actually having an impact on our desired outcome. This is in a very swift, manner. Now we're rushing through it, a bit of the structure from an opportunity solution tree. The most important part, though, what you have to get right is this understanding, the outcome and the opportunity. And this is where everyone always reacts, oh, this is the easy part. It's easy to understand, but honestly, it's really difficult to master and practice. And I'm not sure how many of you have been running a lot of workshops, with OSTs, with stakeholders and teams, and then try to break it down. And you will see it takes time to build the rationale about it and this understanding. Let's go for a quick example. And this was for me one of the most inspiring one, actually, which I came across 6 or 7 years ago. It's actually from Stanford.He school, so definitely not my credits. But it made so much sense to expand a bit on this concept. So if you look at this picture, and I would ask you, like, hey, what does the girl need? What would be, what would come into your mind? I'm not sure now if we have a chat there, Akos, or if you want to do a guess yourself. Do we get something on this?
So on the chat, feel free to guess. Someone's guessing groceries.
Good. Okay, but we can take this already, the groceries, because this is a fabulous example.
Yes.
The typical answers which are coming in is, for instance, groceries. She needs a snack. She needs a ladder. She needs a lower shelf, right? So the interesting part here is, guys, all of that is actually a noun, right? And let's try to replace a noun with a verb. And then you try to answer the same question again. What would that be? And then suddenly people start to think. And it might be, for instance, you say she needs to reach. What is this difference? Why are we talking about verbs and nouns now? With a verb like she needs to reach, it could be a ladder. It could be a snack. It could be a shelf. It could be a rocket. I don't know. We could brainstorm in this group and we'll come up with 50 different examples. But if we say it's a ladder, we're done here, right? With solutionizing. We will build the first thing, it's a ladder. If you say she needs to reach, we are completely opening up our solution space. And this is the important point to understand. People are not buying this quarter-inch drill. They're buying a quarter-inch hole. And this is the benefit, what I see on a day-to-day basis, when you need to solve a very complex problem from stakeholders or business challenge, that you can clearly define the outcome and you can break it down. Like we start with a mindset that there's more than one solution to this problem. And we will go with the most effective opportunity to address our desired outcome. Because if we go ahead and we say, hey, it's an output, it's the quarter-inch drill, our solution will be a quarter-inch drill, right? If it's a quarter-inch hole, we will say, oh, it could be a quarter-inch drill. But you know what? There are 5 alternatives to that. So this is important to understand. You are widening your opportunity solution space, basically, or your opportunity space tremendously. Just bearing that in mind when we talk about outcomes and opportunities. So let me give you a very brief example, and I cannot break everything down into all details because then we would need to spend way more time on it. But let's imagine you're building a banking app, right? And you say, hey, we receive a business target. We need to grow our customer base by X%. And then you go down and you set yourself a target, could be an OKR, whatever you want to call it. And then you say, hey, our desired outcome is we're going to improve the registration completion ratio, right? So we're not talking about a feature. We say, hey, because it's important, if we're getting more efficient how people are onboarding themselves, we will grow our user base. And then you can break down all the opportunities you have. Let's imagine we talk about we identify one where we say it's improving the KYC, because the KYC, like the verification, is something what people don't like. You need to speak to an agent, it takes time, very well-known problems. So let's imagine you've done some user research. You speak to your customers, you look at the data, you look at your onboarding funnel, and rather than starting with solutions, you break this opportunity into sub-opportunities, and you realize, hey, a couple of people actually are voicing their concerns that they don't have time to do it. They would expect a bit more flexibility when they can complete this KYC. Then you also realize, we see a lot of people are starting it and they're dropping off again. So, hey, we could actually remind them of it, right? And another alternative might be, a lot of people tell us they don't know how much time they need to dedicate to it. Is this, this conversation with an agent taking 5 minutes, 20 minutes? So it would be great that they understand the length of it. So here we are basically, again, opening up the options, what we can do, but we're not limiting us to a concrete feature. This is starting the next space where we can say, what can we do to provide customers with more flexibility? We potentially, for instance, can do something like, let them snooze the video KYC so they can come back to it later. Reminding customers, what can we do? We can send a push notification, we can send email reminders. There will likely be 7 other solutions to this need. We can enable them to understand the length of it. Let's create a visual progress bar, right? So you understand exactly where you are in the onboarding flow, and so on and so forth. Then we can define an experiment, for instance, hey, let's test multiple push notifications to see what is performing best. And then we see again if we're hitting our outcome or not. So this is just to give a bit of an example on how we can break this down. And this layer here is the one where really your user research and your continuous discovery is coming in. So think about the verb versus noun thing, what I just explained. Here you can look at the data you're seeing, the conversations you have with your customers, and this is something which is continuously growing. So this is important to understand. This is not like a one-stop thing. Hey, let's get together in our team. We create an opportunity solution tree, and then we're done. Ideally, this tree is growing, and you can go back to it. And why this is so important for stakeholders, we will cover in a minute. But it's a continuous process. You keep on learning, you keep on growing your understanding of the opportunity space and the respective desired outcome. It's actually, and I think coming back to stakeholder alignment, for me, opportunity solution trees have become kind of a superpower, in your product arsenal, how you can drive stakeholder alignment. And the reason for that is the following. And let's be honest, I'm sharing 2 examples here, and maybe people, can react to it if they feel they have seen this already in the past. So the first one is, you start to work with stakeholders or with your team or, the wider team related to your squad. And then you actually feel, hey, we're all on the same page. We discussed this or that, right? But then in the end, you figure out, hey, people have completely different understanding on what they want to achieve or what the purpose of a certain product is. And there's another situation, right, where every one of us is coming in with his own bias, with his own experience, with his own concerns, with his own expectations. So we're looking at an opportunity or an outcome, for instance, from completely different angles. So it's very difficult for people, to get this big picture on actually where are we going and how can we make sure we are aligned. And the important part here is we're humans and it's quite simple. We are all very visual. And this is why it's so imperative that we are outlining something in a way that is easy to digest and that we explain the why. So think about a backlog. This is just an exemplary screenshot from the web. But it doesn't matter if you use your backlog. A roadmap obviously is way more meaningful. But in the end, it's not so easy for a stakeholder to immediately understand what is the big picture behind it. And also for your team, why are we doing this? Where are we going with that? And with an opportunity solution tree, you provide a structure which is a bit more easy to digest. It's a bit more self-explaining, so you have an overarching purpose and how you can break it down. And if you then have a structure, and I will talk about how you can embed that potentially in your planning cycle in a second, you will see that you run an experiment, for instance, but now suddenly you will be able to connect it to the bigger picture where, stakeholders or your team might question, hey, why are you doing that? And then you have out of the blue a structure which is easily to follow. We are running this experiment because we believe it's important to see if we can validate the solution. If the solution is going to work, we will impact this desired outcome. If this desired outcome is impacted, it has an impact on our business strategy. So you basically have a red line on how you can connect the dots. And yeah, honestly, I think also PMs sometimes, as PMs, we make our life too easy by, for instance, arguing hey, stakeholders don't understand. And I have heard this term quite often. And there's always a different case, right? And there might be a case which is valid, of course. But think about the following example. You are the VP of a critical business function, and you have a great idea for a feature request. And actually, you're sponsoring this initiative. And then you approach the PM. So you walk to the desk and you say, hey, guys, listen, I have this idea. I think it's so important. We need to work on this now. Everyone will love it, and so on and so forth. And then let's imagine you respond to the stakeholder and say, hey, we've already defined our roadmap. That's not part of it. Sorry, we are done here. With this reaction, you will likely not have a very constructive setup with this person, because again, the problem is you might have already done all of the comparison work and the opportunity scoring and the sizing, but this person doesn't know, right? So this is the difficult part also with a roadmap, because they believe or might think, hey, you're missing out of something really, really important. So the alternative to that is, let's imagine, there's a PM, you say, hey, thanks for sharing this. Let's take a joint look at what we ultimately aim to achieve and which opportunities we have already identified. And then you can, compare those a bit more clearly and say, hey, we actually have an alternative opportunity which would hit the same target, the same outcome, but we actually believe it has more impact and it's only half the effort. And then the conversation becomes a bit more structured, more constructive, and you can compare opportunities at a certain level. And also, honestly, beyond stakeholders, I think there's little more demotivating for engineers, for instance, to be told, hey, we need to build that, go and build something. I mean, this is something we obviously shouldn't do. But the issue is quite often, it might be the case that engineers are lacking the context. And what I see beneficial here from an OST perspective is the following, that you again start with a desired outcome, So you start with something where you provide the rationale. You help the team to understand, and ideally you keep your team involved when you're mapping that in the early innings, and explain to them, hey, this is really important to achieve. Might use your data, on the left side of Miro, bring it up, share the context, share the strategy, share the rationale on why this outcome has been selected and why it matters for your business. And then you can break it down and think about how can you break this outcome into opportunities? How can we, again, what we discussed, what we covered before, how can we exactly address that in the most effective way? On the other hand, you also have a path again, so we can tie something back. If you need to argue and articulate, hey, why are we working on that? Why does that matter? It's again an alternative to a backlog. So you can more easily, more visually connect it to what are you ultimately aiming to achieve. Talking briefly about organizational aspects, like how can you connect an opportunity solution tree to a planning cycle, for instance, or OKRs, or your strategy which you're working on. So I think, again, there is no right or wrong, and every company has its own approach. Every company has their own resources, their own constraints, their own planning structure, their own culture. What just helped me personally is to basically break the whole planning structure a bit into 3 cycles or 3 structures, and show visually that there's an opportunity space at the bottom. So for instance, think about a company planning cycle. You might have, you have your vision, you have your mission, you as a company, not as a product team. We come to that. You have your business strategy, what you need to go, where you want to go in the next, for instance, 12 or 18 months. And you set annual objectives like, hey, this year we need to grow our revenue, we want to expand into new countries, and so on and so forth. And then you have the product layer, right? Where you start typically with, hey, what is the product vision? Why are we ultimately building this? What is the change we want to bring to our customers, and so on and so forth. Then you connect it to the product strategy, where you set the right targets and where you defining clearly what are you going to do and not, based on your understanding, what's the market, what are the constraints, what is the competition doing, what are the resources you have, and how are you ultimately going to realize your product vision, right? And then you have ideally something where you have your outcome layer. So we're not talking about what are we going to ship again. We talk about, hey, in order to be successful, we need to inform what does a successful outcome look like. So in order to deliver on our strategy. And based on that and behind that, you have your opportunity layer, where you visually just structure and map that there's more than one solution to the problem. So just, how we can connect a bit the dots to what I mentioned earlier, that we are able to connect an experiment again up to a clear target. And this is basically your desired outcome. We can call it OKRs, we can call it objectives, whatever it is. And then you have your opportunity space, where we are outlining visually that this is how we want to realize our desired outcome. One important part though to learn or to understand there is product outcomes versus business outcomes. So here I've seen, honestly, quite some confusion happening, and also that this was not completely understood. To give you an example, I think it's important, you need to clearly distinguish between being able to distinguish between both of them, but they are connected. So you typically start with, and you should have a business outcome. You need to know what success looks like for your business. And the product outcome is something where you say, hey, how can we enable and contribute to this business outcome? So let's go for an example. Your business outcome might be, hey, by end of the year, we want to reduce our customer acquisition costs by X%. And then depending on what are the team you're working in, what, the respective squad, the respective group, you need to set the targets, like how are you going to achieve this outcome, right? So for instance, as a checkout team, you might say, hey, we want to improve the checkout conversion rate by X%, because we know if we are more effectively turning the acquired traffic on our landing page into customers, we will naturally reduce the customer acquisition costs. And then we can think about, what are the opportunities behind that again to realize our desired outcome? So some of the questions then, honestly, what I've seen, have been hearing a bit was like, but why should we actually care as a product team about the business outcome? Isn't our job purely to optimize for the customer? And I think the best answer, honestly, to that has already been given by actually Teresa Torres herself. Akos mentioned the book in the beginning, highly recommendable. Read it. I was reading it twice already, and actually the second time there were even more learnings for me. And what she said actually was an interesting one. There was an interview a few months ago, which she said the product team job is to create value for the customer while you're creating value for the business. So if you're ignoring the business value and you build a product or a solution, which is, for instance, not commercially viable over time, then you might have the problem that your product might be shut down, or even worse, your business might be shut down. But if this is going to happen, you're not creating any value for any customer. So in order to maximize the value equation for your customer, you need to consider and start with the business value. So this is just a bit to connect the dots. So make sure that you keep this in mind, and it also will help your stakeholders to clearly understand the structure and how you break it down. Last but not least, looking at the time, I will give like just a very quick impulse on how we are, for instance, operationalizing that. And everyone, I mean, again, there's no right or wrong. There are a lot of different techniques and structures what you can use. But one of the topics which was important for me to understand and embrace is like the difference between opportunity mapping and opportunity management. So opportunity mapping, something, what every one of us has already done, right? You go into a workshop, you set, for instance, the desired outcome, you provide the rationale, and you break things down properly. And then you might end up with, a huge opportunity solution tree. This is just one screenshot, one example. But typically it's quite broader than that. But then you need to think about, hey, if this is going, if this is growing, you need to find a way to effectively manage the opportunities which you're identifying, which you're prioritizing, and make them comparable on an easy way for your team, for the engineers, for your stakeholders. And what we started to use is something which is called Jira Discovery. I think many of you have already seen it or used it potentially. So we started, for instance, to use that in each of our teams. And we are using that actually for opportunity backlog management, in a sense of that we can understand what are the opportunities we have identified, how can we prioritize them, and how can we assess them. So I will give an introduction, just a very brief one, and the screenshots I'm sharing is a demo project I've briefly created because I cannot unfortunately share all of our Grover detailed boards with you, but it might give you an understanding on how you can use it, really in a high-level example. So I said you can use this for capturing ideas, to assessing it, and also planning the roadmap. So there's really a lot what can be done because it's basically 100% customizable. But let's go through an example. Let's say you guys have mapped your opportunity solution tree. And then you click in one of those post-its where you say, oh, this is the one where we consider it as a high impact priority. So there's a Jira integration, which is nice. So what you can do, you can push this post-it, click on push to Jira to create an opportunity with it. And then I can link it, for instance, to the respective opportunity solution tree I have set up in Jira Discovery. And then it is ending up in my inbox. So how does it look? What I'm doing with that, I'm quickly switching to the tool to do a brief demo on it. So I hope you can still read it, or it's not too small. But what you see here is my opportunity inbox. And again, there are hundreds of ways how you can set it up. And honestly, also our teams have a completely different style and structure and setup, how they are precisely using it, which is fine, right? You shouldn't enforce a detailed standard. Every team needs to identify on their own how they can create most value with a certain tool or framework. But here an example, I just have pushed this checkout idea, what I've shown to my opportunity inbox. And the benefit here, what I can do is, I have here my inbox, which I'm basically going through on a weekly basis as a PM, and I can triage it and I can assess it. So let's imagine we have a new opportunity identified, the example we've shared earlier, like let users snooze their KYC. So I can actually link it here to an outcome where I say, oh, this is actually related to what we discussed before. Oh, the outcome is reducing CAC. We want to improve the verification UX. This is the opportunity solution to your opportunity. We might have a component for our product, which could be checkout. And then we can go into a proper scoring, right, with our team. Just making an example here. which will affect my score. And if I go into it, obviously, I want to make opportunities comparable, which is very important because in the end, think about the example with the stakeholder. You will have those conversations like A versus B. So you can use, for instance, here, predefined templates. For instance, you can create your own one, like what I did, to give a bit more structure, what everything can use. You can fill this out, and basically you're done. And then you can say, oh, it's assessed, right? So you have assessed an opportunity in a structured way, which is a bit more easy to follow than a huge mirror tree. And it's not lost. So we have it here in our opportunity backlog. And this is how and here I can structure it like I want. Like there are all options given. I can, for instance, here filter it based on the opportunity, improving verification UX. So if I come up with a new solution to a certain outcome, I know precisely, hey, what are the topics I've already looked at? And what is actually their impact? And what is the data we've gathered over time? So let's imagine, this stakeholder knocks at your door again and says, hey, I want to build A or B. You can actually even go here to something which is an opportunity map, where you say, oh, what are we talking about? Oh, we talk about, improving verification UX. So I can filter here, for instance, for the opportunity solution tree. I say, let's go for improve my verification UX. And then I basically see here, based on the impact and the effort and the confidence I have about this opportunity, that we already identified, that showing the onboarding progress bar is even more impactful for us based on the data we've gathered. This is just a quick example. As said, we can spend way more time on that. This is highly customizable. In the end, it's another tool. It's important how you use it and that you find your own structure for your company. So wrapping this up quickly, I think we're also on the last slide for that. Make sure that those frameworks are working for you and not the other way around. It's great if you follow the book, and it's a great book, as I've already mentioned. I'm a huge fan, actually. But also, your organization is unique. Every organization, right? Every organization has, to a certain extent, their own culture. They have their own processes. They have their own resources. So it's important that we take, a bit of the learnings we have from a book, for instance, or a course, whatever it is, but we apply it for our own setup that is working. And I've seen what I've seen failing was when people try to be perfect to the book and say, hey, if something is not followed exactly like it's described here or there, we shouldn't do it. And I think it's not correct. You should take the learnings which are working for you, iterate, test it out, improve it, and keep it flexible. Keep it flexible for your team. So quickly wrapping this topic up, couple of key takeaways. I said, if we don't have a Palantir, we can't afford to skip product discovery, especially not for impactful and critical products. Outcome versus outputs. Think about the verbs versus noun topic on how to prioritize. Use OSTs as a stakeholder alignment superpower, right? So make sure you can visually structure it and help them to understand, what are you ultimately aiming to achieve? And there's more than one solution. And if they come up with one, it's great, but put it into context, make it comparable. Map your opportunity space collaboratively. So ideally, you keep your team and stakeholders involved. So we've done this multiple times, honestly, and it was working for me really well. The only learning I had was you need to prepare it to a certain extent. So just starting with a blank space, saying this is the desired outcome, people will get confused with opportunities and solutions. I've seen this over and over again. So prepare a couple of examples that you can show, hey, this is what we already were coming up with, and then you open it up, with the rest for ideation with your team. And define a standard, how you manage those opportunities. If you don't have a standard, what I've just shown, for instance, in Jira Discovery, what is the score we are applying, how are we defining, how we are, how are we adding confidence and how are we adding data, it's difficult that you make them comparable again. So a standard really matters. And yeah, last but not least, there is no silver bullet. I'm also not able to provide a silver bullet. Those are my learnings, which I had across a certain period of time. And everyone has their own approach. And I think it's important that you find your own way based on all the sources and the content you're gathering. I think we're almost on time. So thank you a lot for the attention. And I think we can open it up if we have any question.
So we have a number of questions already in the chat, and let me just see. I'll let everyone just take the next seconds. If you have any further questions, just throw them in. To give them time, I have one which I wanted to ask up front. Grover, it's a big company. You have hundreds of employees, multiple product teams. When I imagine and visualize this tree in front of me, what it must look like for Grover, you end up with a lot of experiments, right? So how can you work yourself through that? How can you do it efficiently? Do you have some sort of automations or tools that that are particularly helpful for you?
No, I think it's a good question. So we have each team is basically running their own opportunity solution tree to a certain extent. Quite often it's getting shared. We also figured out sometimes, hey, one or two teams were almost, addressing the same outcome, and then they were exchanging the ideas. But you can think about every team is running their own. And as I said, we have a couple of teams who are not running an opportunity solution tree. So it's not like, hey, a requirement, we need to see it, we want to see it. But yes, we're running a lot of experiments. We're actually looking to a couple of options. Is there a way for us to be faster, be more efficient, that we, for instance, can do even more directly in production without engineering support to a certain extent? So we're using a couple of different options on what are we putting behind the flag, what are we not putting behind the flag. We're, for instance, spending a lot of time also to validating additional products, which are going beyond physical subscriptions. We're talking about digital add-ons, but we're also figuring out, for instance, hey, what's the fastest way for us to realize is there a need for a customer or not? So you start, for instance, with a fake door test, which you launch very quickly. You're gathering clicks. So I think we don't have yet defined a standard. What we're discussing right now, for instance, we have something introduced which we call like PM Masterclass, where we have internal knowledge sharing sessions, but we also have external guest speakers. So we just had someone, I'm not sure if she's on the call, we had her last week about experimentation, where we learned, hey, actually, maybe we need to use an experimentation calendar to just align ourselves better. So we're just trying to basically get better in what we're doing.
Yeah. And let me use your last sentence as a segue to one of the first questions asked. If you could give some examples of experimentation, and we could do like a separate webinar, but just so some of the ones that you at Grover most frequently use successfully.
I think it's a great question. I think, as you said, he likely can spend way more time for another webinar on that. Maybe a few also where I've recently been involved in. But for instance, one of the experiments where it was not a major effort, but the impact was tremendous, was related to a copy. So you would be surprised what's the impact of content design, to which degree, where we had an offer which was very important for us due to business reasons. And we had to figure out, hey, how do people react to it, which was a bit more tricky because it involved a lot of, for instance, also contractual and compliance work. So you always will have this balance between making it as sexy as possible for the customer, but being compliant. At this point in time, we tested different also, push notifications to a certain extent to figure out, hey, what is working best, what is not working best. We actually are also running a couple of experiments at the moment, So when you go and order something, sometimes we're testing, are people actually interested, for instance, in a digital add-on? To figure out, is this something you would click on in the basket? Because if you're not clicking on it, why should we actually build it? Coming back to the example, building something for 8 months, if people are not clicking on it and I can test it in 4 weeks, maybe as a quick experimentation.
Good. Very good example. I have another technical question here about the tool where your opportunity solution trees live and Jira Discovery. And do you have like links between the two?
So I need to look up what exactly the integration is, but if you Google like Jira, Jira Miro integration, this is the one. And then typically you are able to filter based on how you define it. You can filter for your Jira Discovery board. And there I would just recommend use the proper abbreviations. So for instance, you can add OST or something to it, and then you easily find it. But Google Miro Jira integration, and then you can push it from Miro, for instance, to Jira Discovery.
Okay, got it. I have another question about revisiting the opportunity solution tree. How often do you do that with your PMs?
I think this is a great question from Jonathan. Every PM has really their own style. Every team has their own approach, honestly. So what we are seeing is like on a quarterly basis, we get together also with stakeholders, and we even started sometimes when we're doing our quarterly planning that we also even visualize the targets and what we can do in form of an opportunity solution tree. So like how we're breaking it down, just to get into this mindset, there are more options to it. But the real opportunity solution tree, we had teams, who were visiting it partially 4 times a day. We had a challenge where we wanted to understand a certain behavior on, for instance, the Grover card, which we were building, and we were mapping out a huge opportunity solution tree. And that we spent like, I think 4 or 5 times a day, we partially opened it. We were checking back into it. We learned something new. It also depends on how often are you learning something new. So we have phases where we sometimes interviewing customers on a weekly basis, but not every team is doing that. And it's also a lot of effort. It's not so easy. And it's the same with data. How often are you checking your dashboard? You learn something new. Someone is dropping here. It triggers an idea. But it's typically up for the PM. And every PM has a bit their own approach on how they want to use it. But we are not enforcing something.
Okay. Thank you. Jonathan has another intriguing question about complexity of testing solutions and how you consider that when you prioritize.
I think this is an extremely difficult one, and another great question on that. Also, when you read the book, when you spend time on it, there's a bit of an advice you should prioritize opportunities over solutions. I personally, honestly, found it difficult. And why did I find it difficult is like the following. An opportunity might give me a very rough thing, oh, can I do that or not? But how should I assess effort on something where I don't know yet how a solution looks like, right? So this makes it a bit more difficult. Again, every team is running here with their own approach. We are quite often going, what we learned over time was go with something simple, honestly, just to get started. And quite often we're applying an ICE or RISE framework to that, just to go for a solution, which we believe, hey, this is our assumption, this makes more sense. And then we start to do a rough estimate first before we go into the detailed assessment. But I think the nice part, just as a follow-up on that, is in Jira Discovery, what I've shown is like you move it through a pipeline, right? You then add it, you have assessed this opportunity, you can say, oh, let's add it to our discovery backlog. And then you will likely spend more time on the predefined data which you have gathered. It just, I think it's a process. Your scoring is not done. It's not an event, hey, this is the final score, like you learned something new, and then you can reassess it.
Thanks so much. I have a question from Anna. I wanna throw up here with which is assessing your confidence in a solution.
I think it's another good question on that. Let's put it like that. I think you also gather data over time. So we're just running, for instance, an initiative where we started. Let's run a survey. We started with a survey, 1,000 users. Then we know, oh, okay, our confidence in that, it's great. It gives us an indication. Our confidence was not so high. We followed up with an A/B test, a fake door test in production again, for instance. So we launched with a survey, confidence was not so high, but we said, oh, we need to set up an A/B test. But the difference is the A/B test just takes more time to be prepared properly. So while we're preparing it, we were going ahead with a survey. So your confidence score is basically growing based on the likelihood, on the impact you expect that this solution is going to have.
Okay, so if you're not convinced by the experiment, if the experiment doesn't have like a clear falsification or support of your solution, then you'll just continue and pick another way to test it and experiment.
Exactly. Also, I think, it's difficult to get 100%. You never get 100% clarity, right? You get great indications and signals where you're going, and you can learn a lot from an experiment. But quite often, we also have been running multiple tests or experiments for a certain project.
Yeah. Jonathan just linked in. I'm going to put it for everyone to see a good book on. It's called Confidence Meter, which is exactly focusing on the question that Anna asked. I have a last question from Stephan. It's about the tooling. If you have experience with alternatives of Jira Discovery.
In the ClickUp, a great question again. So it's great also to reflect on all of that. So I think Stephan, maybe he's referring to the ClickUp, the Chrome extension on the top where you can capture something. I'm not sure if you can give thumb up or thumb down if I get it right. But if you're referring to this topic, because there's one option where you can say, hey, you're reading something and you push it to an opportunity. This is where I have not used it to a certain extent, to be honest.
Yeah, he just commented that there's a tool called ClickUp, which is I assume he's considering or using it.
Not yet, but it's important. It's good comment. So maybe we can connect afterwards. Happy to learn about it.
Thanks so much for being here today. Thanks for sharing all the stories. I will remember. The girl trying to take groceries. I think I was thinking of groceries, and then afterwards I thought it was good or not to stay silent. But I should have said groceries as well. Anyhow, thanks so much. Super insightful, and wish you the best of luck with Grover and your teams. Carry on with the OSTs, and I hope to see you around.
Totally. Thanks for having me, and thanks guys for the questions. So really, really exciting and engaging. Have a good one.
Thanks everyone for the engagement. Yes, big thanks goes to you and the quality of questions. Hope to see you around as well. Take care, everyone.